All right, let's jump right in. Today, we're tackling a really challenging idea, something that feels kind of counterintuitive. We're asking, why is it that some of the wealthiest, most diverse cities on Earth sometimes have public services that are, well, in surprisingly rough shape? So, this whole thing kicks off with a personal story. Imagine a student moving from Warsaw, Poland, over to Chicago. Now, you'd think Chicago, being so much wealthier, would have it all figured out, right? But he was absolutely stunned to find that the city's public transit system felt underfunded, even neglected, compared to what he was used to back home. And that observation, that's the mystery at the heart of what we're digging into today. This isn't just a Chicago versus Warsaw thing. He started noticing the same pattern inside the US, comparing diverse city centers like New York or Chicago with their wealthier but much more ethnically uniform suburbs. So, what is going on here? Okay, so to get to the bottom of this, here's our game plan. We're going to start with that initial puzzle, the tale of two trains. Then we'll broaden out to the big academic question. We'll investigate the hard data, explore why this might be happening, peel back the layers to see how complicated it really is, and finally, ask what it all means for building a better society. Right, so back to those trains. The contrast was just stark. You had the city trains, the CTA, serving a super diverse population in Chicago, and they were in pretty bad shape. Then you had the metro trains heading out to the whiter, more homogeneous suburbs, and they were clean, on time, just really well run. The only explanation that seemed to make sense was a difference in how willing people were to pay taxes to keep these systems going. But one person's experience, no matter how compelling, isn't proof. So this takes us from a simple observation to a really serious question that researchers have been wrestling with for years. Is there an actual, measurable, statistical connection between more ethnic diversity and less investment in public goods? To answer that, we have to look past the anecdotes and get into the cold, hard data. And thankfully, this isn't a new question. Researchers have run hundreds of studies all over the world to see if this pattern is real. So how do you even begin to get a definitive answer? Well, you don't just do one more study. You do a meta-analysis, which is basically a study of the studies. Researchers gathered up the results from 172 different papers to get this incredible bird's-eye view of all the research that's ever been done on the topic. And what did they find? Well, the headline number is pretty jaw-dropping. About 60%, a clear majority, of all of those studies found a negative relationship. In other words, as ethnic diversity in a community went up, the quality or the funding for public goods tended to go down. This chart here lays it all out. 60% of the studies showed that negative effect. The other 40%, they found no statistically significant link one way or the other. But here's the real kicker, the part you absolutely cannot miss. Out of all 172 studies, not a single one found a positive relationship. The evidence only points in one direction, from negative to neutral, but never ever positive. Okay, so if there's a real statistical link here, the next big question is, why? Right? What's actually going on under the hood that could possibly explain this connection between diversity and public services? Researchers have a few main ideas on the table. First, it could be that different groups just want different things. Maybe one group prioritizes schools while another wants more money for parks. Second, communication can get tricky, and not just because of language barriers, but because of different cultural norms. And third, it can be a lot harder to build the social trust needed to make sure everyone pitches in and to call out the free riders who don't. And then you have to add another major layer to this, interethnic inequality. We're talking about the economic gap between different ethnic groups in the same place. When you have a lot of diversity and a lot of inequality, that negative effect seems to get even stronger. The theory here is that wealthier groups might start to resist paying taxes for services they feel mostly benefit other, poorer groups. But hold on. It would be a huge mistake to just stop here and say, okay, diversity equals worse public goods. Because the reality is so much more complicated than that. As we're about to see, the context, the where, the how, and even the who changes everything. I mean, just look at the difference between the US and Europe. In the United States, where the lines around race and ethnicity have been historically very sharp, about 65% of studies found that negative link. But in Europe, that number drops to 50%. This tells you that a country's unique history and the specific kind of diversity it has really matters. And get this is wild. It turns out even the academic field of the person doing the research makes a difference. Studies by economists, they found a negative effect 73% of the time. But for sociologists, it was 45%, and for political scientists, just 41%. The source suggests this could be because they use different methods. Or maybe, just maybe, some fields are a little more hesitant to publish findings that might have tricky political implications. This brings us to a really critical counterargument. What if the problem isn't diversity at all? What if the real issue here is discrimination? This theory suggests that maybe when one group holds most of the political power, they might choose to underfund services in diverse areas or in places where minorities live. So the problem isn't that there are many groups, it's about the actions of the group in charge. And for a perfect real-world example of this, you just have to look at Kenya and its neighbor, Tanzania. In Kenya, researchers saw that school funding was a full 25% lower in more diverse districts. But right next door, in Tanzania, there was no negative effect whatsoever. So what gives? Well, Tanzania had put a ton of effort into nation-building policies that actively worked to create a shared national identity, making ethnic identity less of a dividing line. So after going through all of this, the data, the potential causes, the really important counterarguments, what's the big takeaway? Where do we go from here with this information? Well, it really boils down to three things. First, we have to acknowledge that this statistical trend is real, especially in places where ethnic divisions run deep. Second, we have to understand the context. This isn't about diversity in a vacuum. It's about how it interacts with inequality and discrimination. And maybe most importantly, we have to focus on solutions, because the example of Tanzania proves this isn't destiny. The right policies can make a world of difference.
And that leaves us with the real challenge, doesn't it? The data isn't saying diversity is a problem. What it's really doing is revealing a problem, often a lack of social trust and cohesion. So the question for all of us isn't about how to manage diversity. It's about how we can proactively build that shared trust, that common purpose that allows everyone in every kind of community to not just get by, but to truly thrive together.